All right, this covers the second part of Chapter 4 on cell types and microbiology. And here we're going to go over eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells are more complex cells than prokaryotes. And we're going to kind of go over some differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. And then we're going to describe what's called endosymbiosis and kind of deals with the origin of eukaryotic cells. I want to remind you there are two basic cell types: prokaryotic cells from archaea and bacteria. These are small cells that are simple with no internal compartments or organelles, but they appeared first in that we have the oldest fossils from prokaryotic cells, and they are chemically diverse. Eukaryotics cells are much larger, 10 times larger, 10 times longer, and maybe 100 to 1,000 times bigger in volume. And they're complex. They all contain a true nucleus. They have many other membrane covered organelles that divide them into separate compartments. We think eukaryotic cells appeared much later, in the last billion years or so, and these include fungi, plants, animals, and single-celled eukaryotes, protista, or protozoans. Okay, so just a reminder, with prokaryotic cells, we talked about the capsular slime layer. Flagella, pili, and fimbriae, these are extensions of the cell. We talked about a cell wall, that these cells have a cell wall, peptidoglycan in bacteria, or pseudomyrin in archaea. They also have a cell membrane, a cytoplasm, a DNA containing region in the cytoplasm called a nucleoid, and a 70S ribosome. Very, very simple cells, but very successful design. Eukaryotic cells are much larger, okay, and these include these whole other groups of organisms and us. And so if you've learned about eukaryotic cells in general biology or in anatomy and physiology, it applies here. These cells are the same cells that you probably learned about in high school in biology, with a nucleus and those same organelles. Overall, their organization and design is pretty similar to prokaryotic cells. These cells have a cell wall, but it's different chemically. Okay, plants, some algae cells, some fungal cells have cell walls of cellulose, sometimes chitin, sometimes glucan or mannan. These are mostly carbohydrates that you find, but they never have pseudomyrin or peptidoglycan. These cells also can have a capsular slime layer, also made of carbohydrates, but generally kind of different. These cells also have plasma membranes that are similar in structure and function. A phospholipid bilayer with some sterols that are embedded in there and proteins. And likewise, it functions to control what goes into and comes out of the cell. These same processes affect the plasma membrane. But again, chemically, it's somewhat different. What really separates eukaryotes and prokaryotes are the presence of a nucleus. A nucleus is an internal structure that is separated by a membrane from the rest of the cell's cytoplasm, and inside of it, the cell contains or handles most of its DNA and does most of its inheritance inside the nucleus. Okay, and so it's a separate compartment where the DNA is housed. Okay, its membrane is a separate membrane. It's a double membrane that's separate from the plasma membrane. It has DNA containing regions, that's the chromatin. It also has an RNA containing region called the nucleolus. Okay, and so this is the hallmark, and the term eukaryote means having a true nucleus. And so this is what separates eukaryotic cells from prokaryotic cells. And the nucleus of eukaryotic cells is usually larger than most prokaryotic cells. So it's a big structure and very, very different. And itself, it has transport processes with the cytoplasm. Those pores are what allows things to go inside and outside of the nucleus. Okay, then the cytoplasm of the eukaryotic cell is also different from cytoplasm of prokaryotic cells. Okay, in the cytoplasm, this is the fluid portion of what's inside the plasma membrane. This contains protein filaments that act like a skeleton, the cytoskeleton. These protein filaments, microfibers, intermediate filaments, microtubules, these form a skeleton and transport networks inside of the cell. They allow the cell to move things down a transport highway inside. Okay, prokaryotes don't have anything like this. The same proteins, the microtubules that form part of the cytoskeleton, also can extend to the outside of the cell, forming flagella and cilia. These flagella are different from the flagella of prokaryotes. They're connected to the cytoskeleton and they wave back and forth. They don't rotate. Shorter ones, often in rows, are referred to as cilia. The flagella and cilia both have a similar structure made of microtubules and then surrounded by a plasma membrane. Okay, prokaryotic flagella are made of a different protein. It's called flagellin. It works in a completely different way. Eukaryotic cells also have ribosomes, just like prokaryotic cells, but again, they're different. Their ribosomes are larger. Okay, they're referred to as ADS ribosomes, and so they're substantially larger. They're often attached to membranes, a membrane called the endoplasmic reticulum, although there may be some floating free in the cytoplasm. Eukaryotes also contain a 70S ribosome, just like in bacteria, but that's confined to two organelles. In eukaryotes, this occurs only in the chloroplast and only in the mitochondria. So there's two types of ribosomes in eukaryotes. Okay, there's a picture there of ribosomes. You can see the labeled ribosomes as little dots, and here they're connected to a membrane. And this internal membrane organizes the ribosomes so that here's a site where the ribosomes make new proteins. These membranes that have ribosomes are referred to as rough endoplasmic reticulum and are a major site of protein synthesis. Some endoplasmic reticulum doesn't have those ribosomes, and it's referred to as smooth. And that's just membrane where they're making lipids and glycoproteins, proteins attached to carbohydrates. Okay, these membranes are throughout the cell. This is the endomembrane system, and it's also connected to another series of membranes called the Golgi Complex. A Golgi Complex makes internal vesicles called secretory vesicles or transfer vesicles that are going to carry some substances to other parts of the cell or to be secreted to the outside of the cell. This is a hallmark of eukaryotic cells, and some cells are just filled with endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex. Another important difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes are that eukaryotes contain an organelle called mitochondria. All eukaryotes have mitochondria, and all mitochondria have both an outer and an inner membrane. And on this inner membrane are a bunch of enzymes involved in converting nutrients like carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins into energy compounds called ATP. These energy compounds can then be used in other parts of the cell. And mitochondria do this using oxygen. So this is where aerobic metabolism happens in eukaryotes. And all eukaryotes use aerobic metabolism when they can. Mitochondria are kind of unusual in that they are self-replicating. They can replicate independently of the nucleus. They have their own chromosome and they undergo binary fission, just like a bacterial cell. Mitochondria also have a 70S ribosome, just like a bacterial cell. Another organelle that appears in some eukaryotes are chloroplasts. In chloroplasts, again, you have an outer and an inner membrane, and the inner membrane uses light to capture energy with a series of enzymes that make ATP and sugars. Chloroplasts, like mitochondria, are about the size of bacteria, have their own circular chromosome, and undergo binary fission and have 70S ribosomes. Again, 70S ribosomes don't occur in the cytoplasm. They only occur in mitochondria and in chloroplasts when we're talking about eukaryotes. These kind of unusual features of these two organelles strongly suggests that both chloroplasts and mitochondria were at one time free living bacteria that came to live inside of a eukaryotic cell. This is referred to as endosymbiosis. And at first, this first time that this happened, it must have been just kind of a random event that worked out well for both the bacteria and the other cell that had the bacteria living in it. Eventually, this was such a beneficial event for both organisms that they came to live together and occur only together. And so we think this is the origin of eukaryotic cells, that a eukaryotic cell was actually an archaeal cell that came to have bacteria living in it to do special types of chemical reactions. We even think we can trace in some eukaryotic organisms, single-celled eukaryotes, that have an unusual flagella, that what they have is a spirochete that lives on the surface of the protozoan but still provides locomotion. And so we think we see several stages of this happening in different types of organisms, but all eukaryotes appear to be derived from an archaea. They share gene sequences with an archaea and have similar ribosomes. And then their organelles, particularly mitochondria and chloroplasts, are derived from endosymbiotic bacteria. Okay, so in summary, eukaryotic cells are cells that have a true nucleus. They take care of their DNA inside of that nucleus, where their inherited genetic material, chromosomes, always stay within that nucleus. In their cytoplasm, they contain 80S ribosomes, a cytoskeleton, mitochondria, and usually an endomembrane network. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are two special compartments inside of eukaryotic cells where only some reactions happen. And this is what led to endosymbiosis. Okay, so that's a quick tour of the eukaryotic cell. As I said, eukaryotes also are microbes, but the more common type of microbe that we'll deal more with are prokaryotic cells. All right, so we'll stop there, and we're going to start some new material on Tuesday.